Ready? 3, 2, 1. Hello everybody, welcome to the ADEC University of Malaya webinar. Today we're coming to you live and we will be talking about e-assessment using SPeCTRUM or Moodle quiz. We're very lucky today because as usual we have our head of e-learning, Dr. Zahiruddin Fitri, who will be guiding us through using e-assessment in Moodle. So Dr. Zahir, I'll pass the mic to you.
Hello, Amira.
Hello, Zahir. Welcome to the webinar. Thanks for doing this again for us. I'll let you get started now with your e-assessment using SPeCTRUM.
Okay, thank you. So, thank you very much for joining us in this online training for using SPeCTRUM quiz to replace your assessment or to do online quiz or exam with your students. Probably it can be a final exam that you wanted to do, or merely an assessment of learning that you would design for your students. Okay, so I'm going to share with you my screen, and please be reminded that this screen is the system for UM. So it's called SPeCTRUM, but at the same time, this screen is also the screen that we use for the same as what you would find in any Moodle 3.4 session. Okay, so before we can start going into the course that I'm going to use for the quiz here. So the system that we have is actually based on Moodle 3.4. You may have a maybe Moodle version, a lower version, or an older version, or a higher version. But the quiz function or the quiz module normally be as in any of the Moodle network, okay, or Moodle platform or ELS. Okay, so before you do anything in your Moodle, the first thing that you need to do is first to make sure that you can edit the quiz. So in my version here, just click on turn editing on. So let me demonstrate that. So this is now on actually. So we are changing it to off. Okay. So turn it back on again. Okay, just click on the gear item button. You will see you have this add an activity or resource come up, so that then you can add your quiz. Okay, so in any quiz that we do in Moodle, what we want to have is actually to have the house or the rule. We are going to set up the rule for our quiz. Okay, after the rule has been set, then it's your choice to add the quiz. Okay, so I'm going to show you two ways to add the quiz, but that will be a little bit later. Okay, so first, when you want to access the the quiz function, you do it in the add activity or resource window. Click on the quiz, click on add. Okay, please bear with the probably a little bit slow internet right now. So this is where you have the add new quiz window where you set the rules for the quiz. So setting the rules of the quiz means you are doing setting up the time for the quiz and also the grades and other functions. And for assessment or for exams, you can actually set the browser to have a little bit of security. Okay, so let's continue. So the first thing that you need to have in your quiz would be the name. Okay, so the name is always mandatory. So let's put that name. Okay, it can be whatever name that you want. It can be, for example, you can put it as exam. And the description is where the instructions for the quiz is being detailed out for the students. So the students is going to see it, and there are two ways for you to set the students to see the description, either on the course page or when they go into the quiz, when they start the exam text. Okay, so let's put in here the instructions. Okay. For example, answer all questions, or anything else. So then let's begin to explore all the other options that we have in setting up the rule for the quiz. So remember, the rule is very important because it will determine how the quiz behaves for the students when they see it. The first thing is timing. The timing is quite straightforward, isn't it? So what you need to set up here is when is the quiz open. Okay, enable it. Then you can set it to, for example, if I want to set it, it's going to happen 3 days from now. Okay, and it should start at 12 o'clock. Okay, then the closing of the quiz is a similar thing. So you enable it, then you can set it probably the same day. Okay, but you are going to allow the quiz to run until 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And remember that the timing here is actually on 24-hour format. So please make sure that you use the correct timing, because if you want to have it at 12 o'clock in the afternoon, it should be 12 o'clock. But if you are going to do it 12 o'clock at night, then it will be 00. Okay, so and then the time limit. So time limit is where we enable or we set, if we want to, the maximum amount of time that the students have when they start doing the quiz. Okay, so that means if, for example, as we set up here, the quiz is open between 12 to 3 o'clock. But you can set the time limit so that then the students only have, for example, 45 minutes to answer the quiz. So what it means is that if the student starts the quiz at 12 o'clock, even though the time that we close the quiz is at 3, the students will only have 45 minutes from the start of the quiz that they did up until 12:45. They have to finish everything by 12, because we already set the time limit for the students to be 45 minutes. So this allows you to stagger when people come in to the quiz. So that is one of the uses of the time limit. Okay, but at the moment, if, for example, you want the students to enter at the same time and end at the same time, I would suggest that you just disable this. Then that means all the students start the quiz at 12 o'clock and they finish at 12. When time expires is another quite important quiz behavior that we should set for the students. So what we have here is actually by default is this system put it at open attempts are submitted automatically. So what does this mean? So, for example, we have 10 question quiz, and at the end of the time for the quiz, at the near to the closing of the quiz, the students are doing question number 8, for example. So at 3 o'clock, if we select this option, open attempts are submitted automatically. At 3 o'clock, question 1 to question 7 that the student have answered will be submitted automatically, and the quiz closes for the students. So even though they are working on question number 8, as we demonstrated just now, the quiz will not take into account that answer or that work for it. Okay, so everything that has been answered will be submitted. So the second choice, which is grace period, so this allows the students or allows the educator to set an extra time for the students to finish whatever questions that they are working on. So let's go back to the example where the students are at question number 8, and then the time ends at 3 o'clock. What you allow for the students to do is actually you allow a grace period where the students can work and finish on their last or on their question that they are working on, but then they will not be able to access question number 9 and number 10 to finish the quiz. But they will have a given time for them to quickly finish question number 8 that they are still working on, and then they can submit. Okay, so when we select grace period, the submission grace period will be enabled. Then you can set the grace period to be, for example, let's say, for example, I'm going to give extra 3 minutes for the students. If they are working on a question, they can finish the question. So that is what the second option allows. Okay, and I would really advise our fellow educators to be or steer clear of option number 3. Option number 3 is attempts must be submitted before time expires or they are not counted. What this basically means is that the students is pressured to finish all questions before the closing of the quiz. Because, for example, just now, going back to the example, they are working on their question number 8 out of 10 quiz question. They have finished answering question 1 to question 7. Since the time ends before they could finish all the questions, all the answers that they have done will not be counted, which is quite cruel, I would say, for the students. So I would really strongly against doing or choosing the last option. So normally I would either choose option number 1 or choose option number 2. Okay, all right. So that is the first option, which is timing. So next we go to grades. So grades is how you set your quiz function or quiz module in the SPeCTRUM or your Moodle page to create the quiz based on a different set of pedagogical approach. Okay, you can set the quiz and assessment of learning. So that is where you only normally allow 1 attempt. Okay, but then you can use the quiz as learning and for learning, where you allow more than 1 attempt for the students. Okay, and when you enable the attempts to be more than 1, you will find that you can actually change or select the grading method. So it can be based on the highest grade, it can be based on average grades, or it can be based on first or last grade. So for an assessment for the students, I would normally just allow one attempt. That means only one chance for the students to answer this. That's it. Let's look at layout. So layout is quite simplistic. Normally, I would suggest that you create the layout new page per question. So that means the questions will come up to the students one by one. And the navigation method is where we set how the question appears to the students. A free navigation method means that the students can jump from question to question. So for example, in our 10 question quiz just now, so the students can jump from question 1 to question 3 and then question 8. So the sequence where the students go into the questions is not really important to us. If we choose the sequential, the students will not be able to see the questions before they finish. The students will not be able to see the next question before they finish their previous question. So it is sequential for the students. So in an exam situation, you will find that normally the students can go back and forth in their questions. So I would normally allow for free navigation methods. Means the students can actually jump from question to question. Question behavior, I would normally allow for or make sure that the shuffling within question is enabled. Okay. So what this means is that in a situation where you have a group taking a quiz, students will not see the same questions in the same order. So question 1 to student 1 will not be the same to question 1 to student 2 and question 1 for student 3. All the questions will be shuffled for the students. So it will lessen the ability or chance for the students to look up their answers from their next door friend, for example. Okay, so and we can actually leave the rest of the question behavior as it is. Okay, and the review option is where it is quite important for you to set. Okay, so a review option is what is the behavior of the quiz when the students are taking the quiz, when the students have finished the quiz, but then the quiz is still open, and then when the quiz is closed. For an assessment of learning, so that means it's a one-time exam for the students, I would suggest that everything from immediately after the attempt and later while the quiz is open to be unchecked or unable. Okay, so what this does is that after the students have finished answering their questions, they will not be able to see whether their options or choices are correct, number one, and what is their marks for the quiz while the quiz is still open. I would normally allow for after the quiz is closed, everything can be seen. If it is a high stakes exam, you can actually uncheck the marks, so that then the students will not be able to see their marks even. Okay, but that's I would say a little bit more extreme. I would normally just allow. So after the quiz is closed at 3 o'clock just now, where we set our quiz to be at 3 o'clock, to close at 3 o'clock. After 3 o'clock, they will be able to see all these functions. And then we go to appearance. So appearance is slightly more important when you are having the quiz in a centralized place. For example, in a computer lab, what it does is actually when you enable large image or small image of the user's picture, you will be able to see whether the person taking the exam is the same person who is answering the exam by comparing their picture on the computer with their face. Okay, so that is for a situation where the class is taking the quiz together. You want to check the identity of the students. Other than that, you can leave it as it is. Okay. So extra restrictions of the attempt is where you set security for the quiz or for the exam that you have. Okay. So require password. You can set it so that then the students have an extra security where only people with password can go in. Okay. Same with network address. Then I think this is actually where you want to set the students have to do the quiz at one place only. So you can set the IP address. So for example, you know the IP address for the computer lab that you're using, then you can set it in the network address. But for normal use, I would suggest that you set the browser security to be on. Okay? So at the moment now, the browser security is none. You can set it to full screen pop-up with some general security. So what happens is that the quiz will occupy the whole screen of the students, so they cannot open up different tabs. So probably Google the answers. Okay, so that is the browser security function of the browser security. You can set it to be. Other than that, we have the overall feedback. So the overall feedback is actually where you put in the feedback, general feedback for the students to see when their grade reaches certain level. Okay, but this is not really that important to add. But if you want to use your quizzes or your exams as learning, so for learning, then I would suggest that you start putting in the feedbacks. Okay. Other than that, actually, you don't really have to change any other function. Okay, and so that is how where we set the rules for the quiz. So let's save the quiz first. Okay, so this is how it looks like in our page on our page. Okay, you can go in and let's go over the settings again. Okay, so we have set the timing to be from on the 10th of April from 12 o'clock to 3 o'clock, so I think 3 hours. Then we set that the open attempts are submitted automatically. That means at the end of the quiz, whatever the students have answered, then it will count. Other than that, it will not count. Okay. And then we also set the attempts to be just once. Okay. And then the layout is every question, meaning that only one question that will be seen for the 5 students. And the question behavior, shuffle the questions means the students will not see the same questions when they are doing their quizzes. Review option, which is very, very important. So I set it so that then only after the quiz is closed where they will be able to see whether they have correct answer, what are the marks they get. Okay. Then appearance is not important, but the extra restriction of 10 on attempts. So we have set up so that then we have a full screen JavaScript pop up with some JavaScript security, and the rest is already okay. So if you have any questions, you can actually type it in the chat function, and then probably our moderator would read some of those questions so that then I can try to answer. Okay, so over to Dr. Amira.
Thank you, Dr. Zahir. That was a really good first half of this webinar on e-assessment. And we actually do have two questions from our viewers. I'll read to you the first one. It's from somebody by the name of Dr. or Prof. Izura. So she's asking, when you choose a grace period as 3 minutes, will the students get a notification that time is up and that they have 3 minutes to finish answering the current question?
Yes, exactly. That is what the students is going to get an announcement in their SPeCTRUM page or in their Moodle page to say that it's a countdown saying that you have certain minutes to finish your question.
Okay, thanks, Dr. Zahir. That's good to know that students know that they will have time and they'll be warned about the time being up. So I'll read to you the next question. This is coming from either Professor or Dr. Shikin asking, what if the student is disconnected due to poor connectivity, for example, in the middle of the quiz? Will they be able to resume from where they left off? What will happen to the timing then?
Okay, so as long as the question or as long as the quiz is still open, they will still be able to go back and answer the question. So it should be no problems.
Do you know what will happen to the timing? Will they lose time?
No. What will happen is it will still follow the same time the quiz is on. So they would lose the time when they are logged out and they have to log in. So probably a few seconds to probably a few minutes. But they will not have additional times added to them because the quiz opening and closing time is actually controlled at the server in UN. So they will not have extra time given to them if, for example, they get cut off and then they log in again.
Okay, that's very good to know. We'll probably need to warn our students that they have to make sure that their internet access is strong at the moment. Is that right? Okay, that's great. Thanks so much, Dr. Zahir, for answering those questions. I'll pass it back to you to continue with your presentation.
Okay, so remember in the first few minutes of the session, I told you that there are actually two ways for us to put in the questions into the quiz. So the first half, just now, what we did is we explore how we create the rule or the house for the quiz. So now it's time for us to add the questions into the quiz. The two ways that we can add the questions to the quiz is the first one is by going into the exam or the quiz itself and click on the edit quiz button. Okay, so we click here, it will take us to this page where we can actually add new question. Okay, so that is quite straightforward. So then you can choose all the options that we have here. So different Moodle systems, if they put in the necessary plugins, of course you will get probably more, but the default question types are what are listed here. So multiple choice, true, false, matching, short answer, which is quite normal or quite familiar to us. But then there are additional types that is continually being added into the system. So now we have drag and drop questions, which is quite interesting. I will show you an example of it, and also select missing words. And if you are doing mathematical course or calculation courses, then you have a choice of 3 types of calculated questions: calculated, multi-choice, and also calculated simple. Okay, so that is one way to add the quiz. I will not do it now. Okay, so that is the first way. The second way of adding quiz, the second way of adding questions into the quiz is actually through the question bank. Okay, a question bank It's accessible from the edit settings button. Okay, and then if you go to more, you will be able to scroll down the course administration to question bank. Okay, question bank is where we can add questions into our quiz, and by doing that, users the create new questions. So you now you are given the same option that we had when we add quiz. So multiple choice, true, false, matching, short answer, and right down to select. Okay, so the advantage of using the question bank is that you can now actually create categories. Okay, so what is the meaning and what is the use of categories? So let's say, for example, you want to create questions based on learning outcomes, but then you want to randomize the questions based on learning outcomes. For example, if you want to ask 3 questions about learning outcome 1, you can set the system to randomly select 3 questions from a list of learning outcomes questions pertaining to that learning outcome that you have in your question bank. So let me show you what that is. I have actually created the categories for my quiz here. So here we have already set up 3 learning outcomes. Learning outcome 1, click on that. Okay. So learning outcome 1. So for example, let's say okay. So that is learning outcome 1. Then learning outcome 2, you can always create learning outcome by giving it a name and giving it the category information. So let's create a learning outcome 4, because I have already learning outcome 1 to 3. Okay, so okay, so that is the information for learning outcome 4. Add the category. Now you see that we have learning outcomes. So we have the explanation to learning outcome. So this is where you start to be able to randomize the questions for your students. So let's go back to question. We have 4 tabs here. So let's go back to the question, and let's say that we go back to the default question list. Okay. So using the categories allows you to put in or add questions into certain learning outcome. So for example, remember we have created the learning outcome 1 just now. Okay. So I want learning outcome 1 to have question, or I want to add questions into learning outcome 1. For example, if you go back to the default list, okay, I want question close answer and also the national power to be moved to learning outcome 1. So I can click on that. So now you have 3 questions in learning outcome 1. So when you have this categorization of the quiz questions into learning outcomes, then you'll be able to actually randomize the questions later, make it much more exciting for you as the educator and so for students. Say, for example, that now I want to add questions into learning outcome 3, and I want to create new questions. Okay, so again, what you do is you click on the create the question, choose the question type to add, Okay, let's say for example, we want to add short answer. Okay, then question name. So let's put it as question about COVID-19. Students will not be able to see the question name. This is only for us educators to know what question is it about, okay, or what is the type of question that we are asking. So let's say question text is in the is sweeping world. Disruption 2020. Okay, then the answer is then the grade give it 100. Okay, so that means that is a short answer question. The answer will be COVID-19. Okay, so when we save the quiz, so now we have one question in the question bank under the learning outcome. Okay. So that is how the learning outcomes and also the questions can be aligned. Okay, and that will enable us to create or add questions pertaining to learning outcome, where you create the learning outcome based on categories. So what that does is actually it helps you to then when you create your quiz, you can get randomized questions for the students. Okay, so let's go back to the. So let me go to it slowly. Okay, so now let's look at the question from the quiz itself. And how do we add the question for the quiz? First, you go back to the quiz that we set up the rules for it. Okay, here. And then you click on edit quiz. Okay. So now you can start adding the quiz that we have, the questions from the question bank. Okay. So you can either add a question from the question bank by clicking the middle option, which is from question bank. But we also have a third option where we can add random questions. This is where the category just now takes into account. That is how we make the questions randomized for us. Okay, so let me show you how we create a new question the manual way. Okay, so add a new question. Let's say we are doing the the true false question, which is quite simple to set up. Okay, add, I'll always give it a name. True false. So, say for example, PKP. Okay, so this is a true false question about. Question text is people who did not be can be. Okay, so the correct answer is true. So we said that. Then save changes. So now we have one question that we added manually. We can also add a question using the question bank from the question bank. Okay. So what we do is we click on add question from question bank. So we have a list of questions here, and that is for the default question. But we can actually go in and now select questions from different categories that we have. Okay, so now we can select from learning outcome 2. There are 3 questions that we can use. So then we can actually choose probably one of this. So let's choose that one. Okay, add selection, add the selected question to the list. So now we have this question that we give for. So these 2 questions are actually compulsory questions. That means all the students will see the true false question, PKP, and also the question about the false echo. So let's now create a random question based on categories. So what we can do is actually add random question. Okay, then here we can select the category. So let's say, for example, I want to ask on the learning outcome 1, which we have already 3 questions in there, but I want to select only 2 random questions. Okay, so what happens is that the system would select 2 questions out of the 3 questions that we have. Although the number of questions is not that many because we don't have many questions in there. But imagine what you can do if you have, for example, 20 questions in the question bank, and then you only want to ask 5 questions out of 5 random questions of that. Now the assessment gets interesting because the students will still have to answer questions about the same learning outcome, but the options of asking the questions will be now wide open because you have 20 questions in the question bank. And the beauty of the system is that it will make sure that the questions will be randomized. That means those students will get the same questions in the randomized questions that we choose from the category. So you are still asking this question the same with that follows the learning outcome, but the questions for the students will not be the same. Okay, so let's put that into our category. Okay, so you can actually click random question, okay, add random question. So now you see that we have random learning outcome 1 and random learning outcome 1 for random question. So this means out of the 3 questions that we have, 2 questions will be shown to the student, and the students will not see the similar questions that we have in the question. And you can actually then add a little bit more functionality by creating headings. Okay, so after we've created and selected the random questions, what happens now? We are able to see a new section heading that we can add. Okay, so that allows us to then change the section heading. For example, this one is sorry. So click on enter. So we have that section. So the section 2 we know is for the learning outcome 1. And then we can add again random question. So let's say, for example, now we select from learning outcome 2. We have 3 questions, and I just want to add 1 random question. So click on add random question, and let's separate this into different section again. So it's actually not mandatory that you create the section heading. Okay, this is just get the feel of the question right. Okay, so now we have 5 questions in our assessment or quiz, and then we also have different sets of questions that will be randomized for the students. Okay, and we also have compulsory questions or compulsory questions that all the students will need to answer. So our example here is quite small because we don't have much different types of questions, and also our question bank is not that big. So this is what we can show you, but the principles will be the same. You can have this section, if you don't want to, then you don't have to. What it will actually do is it will actually allow you to change how you answer or how you ask the students the quizzes. Okay, and also do remember that the students will not be able to see the same question. And once we created a compulsory question from a learning outcome, the questions will not be appearing again in the randomized questions. So rest assured that the system is smart enough to differentiate those. So you will not be able to, the students will not see, for example, the first question coming up again in one of the random learning outcomes. Okay, so that is how the students, how the question behaves for the students. Okay, so I think that is the end of the second part of the uh, editing the quiz. So I will open the session again for questions, and later I will show you 2 blog posts that we have about creating your quizzes or exams, online exams or e-exams that we in edX wrote for you to be able to follow the, the, the session if you need further explanation. Okay, so I give this back to Dr. Amira to continue.
Thank you, Dr. Zahid. Dr. Zahid, it looks like we have about a dozen questions that have come in. So I'm going to go through some of those questions and see whether you can address as many of them as possible. So firstly, there have been a couple of questions asking about the possibility of cheating. One asking whether or not there is anything we can do with the browser to prevent students from going into other browsers and looking for the answers. And another is a general question about whether or not this kind of e-assessment actually encourages students to do open book or to actually cheat on their exams.
Okay, so I think when you talk about cheating, students will find 10,000 ways to defeat the system. Okay, so rather than trying to prevent them cheating by going through all this using all the technicalities, I would suggest that you change how you ask the questions instead. So what I mean is that have the students think or analyze questions, the type of question. So that means it's not very straightforward that you can find the answers from the book. So use the high order thinking skills and get the students to create for the educators to create questions that assess students' problem solving skills. Okay, they can have all the formulas in the book, but they need to exercise their problem solving skills to be able to answer those questions. So I would suggest that you go down that route when you are talking about trying to get the students not to cheat, for example. So open book question is one of the way that you can do this. Another thing I would say is that if you time the questions well enough, so that means if you have, for example, that like the example that we have, only five question quiz, but the 5 question quiz only can be answered in the matter of probably like 45 minutes. Okay, with the appropriate level of questioning that we have, then the students will not have time to cheat, because they need to actually figure out the answer which they cannot find from the book. They need to solve the problems with whatever skills that they gain from their learning.
Okay, great answer, Dr. Zahir. The next question is asking, is it advisable to give a 2-hour final assessment or to break them up into smaller parts with shorter time?
Okay, so I think it depends on what the educator wants in this case. So if you think that using the quiz in just one time, or giving them a 2-hour window to answer everything, will work for your course, then by all means do it. But if you think that giving the students questions in chunks, I think that will also be interesting as well. That means it allows the students time to think about uh, their answers. Okay, but at the same time, I would say that when you give the students too much chunking of the questions or the quiz, then it will allow them to collude. That means they can take one question or two questions, get the answers, then they have time to think, and then they move on to the next set of quiz, for example. So there is, I think, plus and minus or pros and cons in pursuing this strategy. And I would say you know your students better than anybody else. So don't follow the standard way of asking things. I would suggest that you do what's best for your students and what is appropriate for whatever level of questions and also whatever skills of the students that they have.
Okay, great to know about that. Okay, next question. How many students can take the quiz at once?
Okay, so I think it would depend on the capacity of your server. So in UM, we have tested the system with 800 students just last week or 2 weeks ago, and it works fine. So with the right setting in your LMS server, then you can actually do it with much bigger numbers, which we are trying and also testing right now.
Okay, that's great. That should be able to cover most courses, I believe. Okay, our next question. Do we have to input the minimum grade to pass under the grade option?
No, the short answer is no. It depends on what you want for your students. So if you want to set the minimum grade, by all means. If you don't really need to do that, then just leave it alone.
Okay, the other question, which I think you will already be covering in this webinar, is how do we get SPeCTRUM to mark the test for us?
Okay, interesting. Well, actually, we have different types of questions just now, isn't it? So let me share that screen again. So if you see in the question types, all of the questions are actually auto marked. That means the system will mark it for us, except for the essay. This is the only response from the students that you will need to grade manually. All the other ones are automatically graded. So you don't really have to worry. For example, I know that some courses have like hundreds or probably 200 students. So if you use the quiz, then ask all the other types of questions apart from the essay question. So then you will get the marks automatically given to you, available to you after the quiz ends.
Okay, with regards to that self-marking capability in SPeCTRUM, we have another question asking, how does the system match the answer provided? Must it be exactly matching with the one that we provide? For example, the answer COVID-19 just now, if a student didn't put a space between COVID and 19, does the answer still consider it as correct?
Okay, so when you look at the question type, so that is actually the short answer question. Let me share my screen again. Okay, so let's go back to this COVID-19 question. So I'm going to edit the question so that now it will not actually change anything. But what I can do is I can add more answers that the students might use. Okay, for example, answer two could be COVID space 20. Okay, still we grade it as 100, so that either this question, either this answer or this answer will be uh, chosen or selected as the right answer for the student. The important is to make sure that the grade is 100. Another thing that you can set is case sensitivity. So I have set this as the case is unimportant. So that means even if the students don't put C as capital letters, then the answer would still be correct. And for example, we can add more iterations of that answer, like that COVID-19, and the grade will have to be 100. So all those answers from the students, all the iterations of the answers of the students will still be counted as the right answer and given.
Okay, thanks. That's very, very useful, I think, for those of us using short answer questions. We have just a few more questions that I'm going to pass to Dr. Zahir before Dr. Zahir goes back to his presentation. So the first one that I'll read now is, how long do you usually set for students to answer each question? For MCQ question, for example.
Okay, so actually the question is not set to answer by time. The quiz itself, yes. For example, if you set the quiz to 2 hours, for example, so the students can use any time between those 2 hours to answer the question. So I would say that you can actually change that by going to the question orders. So if you open the question for what was the term just now? Let me remember. Free
MCQ.
navigation. Yes, free navigation. If you open the terms for free navigation, then of course the students can go back to the questions if they are not able to answer it. But if you set it to be sequential, then of course the students will need to be aware that they have certain time or certain amount of time left for them to actually complete the whole exam that they have or test that they have.
Okay. The next question, is it possible to upload a file with all the questions, for example, 40 questions, instead of one of the two ways that Dr. Zahi showed just now?
Okay, so actually, when you talk about the questions uploading, it's actually based on the question formats. Okay, you can actually upload a question bank using the Moodle question format that you can search online. So let me find that page and then I will share it with you. See. Okay, here. So share that. Okay, so you have different formats for the questions. So these are sorry, so this is sorry about the sound. Let me close the door for a bit. Sorry about that. So question formats. Let's go back. Oops. Stage. Bear with me for a bit. Okay. So if you see the screen now, so these are the different question formats that you can choose. So if you know the question types or the question format, and you write the questions using the question format into your question bank, then of course you can actually import the questions into your question page. And the way to do that is actually by going to the question bank. Okay, let's go back to the question bank and click on import. So these are the different formats that you have. And I would suggest that the easiest format to use is actually either the icon or the GIF format. So you can actually go look it up. Okay, so the GIF format is like this. Okay, so these are examples of GIF format. So you can ask true false type question, multiple choice question, okay, fill in the blank question, math range questions. Okay, so there are different formats that you can write into your question bank, and then you can upload it into the SPeCTRUM course.
Okay, thanks for that. I have a pretty interesting trick question for you to answer, but before we get to that final question, you can get back to your presentation. There are two really quick questions. One is, what is the Moodle version that you are using now? And does this Moodle quiz or SPeCTRUM quiz platform require high bandwidth?
Okay, so the Moodle version that we use in UM is actually Moodle 3.4. I know some of the universities are already on Moodle 3.7 or 3.8, so it's okay. The quiz function is actually the same in all the different iterations or versions of Moodle. Whether it requires big or small bandwidth, I think it would require not so much of a big bandwidth because the way that the Moodle page is set up is actually based on quite a small requirements from the server itself.
Okay, thanks for that. Okay, now for the what I think is a trick question. Is it possible for us to set a question with multiple answers where each answer can be right or each answer can be wrong, and marks are deducted from the answers that are wrong, but the minimum mark has to be 0 for the question?
Okay, so interesting question. And actually the answer is yes, it is possible. When you create the quiz just now, so let me go back to that. Okay, it actually has to do with the settings that we have. So if you go to edit settings, okay, and then
Dr. Zahir, can you share your screen, please?
Oh, sorry. I thought I had shared my screen. Okay, so can you see it?
Yes.
Okay. So let me check the yes. Okay. So it's actually in under question behavior. So how questions behave? So there are a few actually options that you have here, but what the question just now is about is actually deferred feedback with CBM. So CBM is a type of question where it's actually confidence-based marking. The students will be asked, number one, whether the answer is right or wrong, and number two, how confident are they with their answers. So that is how the different feedback with CBM questions behaves. So I think that would answer that requirement where you can actually deduct the marks for wrong answer if the students gets the wrong answer but then feels confident with the wrong answer.
Okay, you obviously are very confident with that very tricky question. So congratulations to Dr. Zahir. So now let's go back to your expertise in your presentation, and you can continue on. I'll hand the floor back to you.
Okay, so let's go back to the questions that we have. So now I'm going to actually show you several types of interesting questions that we have, so that we can set up in our questions or in our page, in our quiz. Okay, so let's go back to the question bank that we have just now. Okay, so I'm going to show you an example of one question that I just explored quite recently, and you can also look at our posting in our blog by looking at our blog at un08.wordpress.com. You can actually go in and look at the different types of questions that we have here. So we also give an example of all the question types. So this post is actually quite long. We give out the different types of questions that's available in Moodle, and we also give show the videos of this question type. So for example, what I wanted to show just now is going to be calculated question. Okay, so calculated questions allows the educators to create question where you can randomize different numbers for the students. So remember just now we have randomized the question orders. We can also randomize how questions in a multiple choice question appear for the students. So let me show that to you first quickly. Okay. So if I go to the multiple choice question, so in the multiple choice, after we create the question name and also the question text, you can select to shuffle the choices. So it means that the different options will be shuffled between different students. So now, no longer that the student A can see the same question as student B. Even within the same question, if the students, for example, get the same question while they are side by side, the options is actually shuffled. So question 1, which is the right option or the right answer is option 1 or A, or number A, or sorry, letter A or number 1 will not be the same as the choices that is available for question student number 2. The shuffling is going to be also done inside the question itself. Okay, so that settles that the shuffling. Okay, so now what I wanted to show is also in the calculation questions. What you can do is you can actually randomize the numbers that appears to the student. So this is an example of calculation question that I created. So what I'll ask them to do is answer this, and then I created this a little bit bigger. So answer this. Number 1 multiplied by number 2 divided by number 3. And when I do that, so I can actually set the answer formula, and the system will create or randomize number 1, number 2, and number 3 for me. And the students will see different numbers, and their answers have to be different, even though we have the same question. Okay, so let's try and create this type of question. Okay, so let's save things first. Let's run with this. Okay, what about it? Okay, so let's create the question again. Okay, so I want to create another calculation question. So create the question, create calculated. Okay, so this is calculated. So let's say instead of multiplication, so let's say yeah, let's go with multiplication. Much easier to show. We can also use other operators, plus, minus, divisions. Okay, so for example, what is okay. The way to write the question is actually by using curly brackets. Okay, so what is standard multiplication? What is so 1 divided by, so this one is then we write the formula. So the formula is what the system will actually read. This needs to be written correctly. Okay, I will show you later where to find the syntax for the formula. So let's create this first. So remember the spelling for this needs to be the same as that we have here. Okay, the formula is going to be different. Okay, so we grade it as 100. That means that is the right answer. Okay, let's say that I don't want the number to be too big, so that it will just show 0 decimals. So it's round number. Okay, you don't really have to change anything here, but in certain examples, then you would need to do this, and you can actually go to our blog to see how that affects the answers. Okay, so save changes. Okay, it will show us or give us this page, the data set property. So we don't really have to do anything here. We just go on to the next page. Okay, so this is where we set up the numbers. So for example, now we see number 1 and small number 2 is already selected and created for the system for us. Okay, so I want to change the range of values. For example, I want just to be know the place, and number 1 I want it to be big numbers. So the range of value not is 1. So let's put it as for example 50, and the maximum would be 500. So you can have your own range. Okay, but this one I just want it to be small but not too small, so it's between 3 to 24. Okay, so and again I don't want any decimal places for it with the uniform distribution. Okay, so now we set the let's set the wildcards, or the numbers of questions that the system will generate for the students. Okay, so let's say I want to set it to 20. Okay, so there will be 20 random sets that will be added. Okay, so let's ask this system to display all these 20 sets that we created just now. Sorry, so first need to get the new item to add. Okay, so let's add 20 and also display. Okay, so so there is a problem here. Oh, okay. So the problem here is the tolerance is not done quite right. Okay. So let's change the so what do we need to change? The data set. So let me figure this out. What is wrong with this? Outside the limits of true value. Okay, so let's I think that's a problem with the syntax that I use. Okay, so let's try this again with a different type or different example. Okay, so let's go back. It works just now, so let's look at how I did it the last time. Okay, so last time is quite straightforward. So we have number 1, and then we have number 2, and you have number 3. Okay, so that's okay. So I didn't actually change anything in the tolerance and also the answer display. But then when I go to save changes, so this is also did not touch anything. So this is how I set up the range just now. So the wildcard number is given also set between 1 to 10 for number 1, then between 1 to 10 also for number 2, and then the wildcard numbers are given slightly smaller range. Okay, and when you set or create the tolerances, then you get the correct answer, which is the inside the limit of the true value. So when we set up the set, when we click on add the items, what it will show is actually it will show a set like this. So if you do it right, then for example, I set it to, so let's display 10. The system would actually show you the 10 sets that we have created. So that is set number 20, set number 19, set 16, and you have the number actually created and selected inside the limits of the true value that we've set up. So that is how actually the questions are being set for students. So the calculation question is quite interesting because it allows you to change and randomize the numbers for the students, and they need to actually give you the right answer. So that is one type of question that I would suggest that educators go and try to use in their work. And then another type of question that I would suggest that we try to add or use, because we have a lot of questions and all of them are actually automa, is that drag and drop questions. Okay, so I have an example of a drag and drop question here. Okay, so let's show first the example of that. So drag and drop. I can actually go in and show you how the question behaves. Okay, so drag and drop is like this. The national flower of, so the right answer is Sabah, it's Acacia. And then the, for example, the shortest river in Malaysia is Malaysia. So the students will be able to select from a different drag and drop options that they have. Okay, and then they can actually submit them. So let's look at how we create the drag and drop question. So let's go into the question again. Okay, so in the drag and drop question type, what you create is actually the options that you have for the student. So here it uses the square brackets, the double square brackets for the options that the learners have to choose. Okay, so I wrote this question here, and let's add another question. So the highest in Sunda double bracket, the double bracket again, so that then the student will be able to choose this. Okay, then of course when you have that, choice number 3. So because we have 3 choices here, I need to actually select for the students. The choice number 3 should be the right answer, which is, so I will just delete this first and put it as highest peak in the peninsula. So this choice number 1, choice number 2, number 3 has to be the right answers. But then you can throw in the wrong choices. So this one can be the shortest we have just now. Also Kinabalu, which is also the wrong answer. Okay, you can actually change the group. For example, you want this to be a different group. Okay, but the first one, so the group would actually is going to be colored differently. You will see how it's done. Okay, so let's preview the question created just now. Oops, sorry, I haven't saved it yet. Save changes, continue editing. Okay, so let's have a preview of that question. Okay, so what we have is actually we have created the question where this first choices is actually in group 1, where it can be either out of the 4 question, but the last question here, the answer must come from these 2 choices. Okay, and you can actually add more choices if you want to. So that is a drag and drop type question that you can ask the student. Then of course, when you put in the right answer, then you have the correct response. So that is the correct response. Okay, so that is another type of question, drag and drop, that we can choose. Okay, so another interesting type that I want to show you. So this is going to be the last one because we are running out of time. We have 95 minutes. Is the drag and drop question. Sorry, this is the so this is the question. So missing words question. So the preview of this is actually like this. So the students can actually choose. Okay, the question, the right answer from the drop down menu. Okay, so let's see how that question is programmed. Okay, so missing words. Okay, again, when you see the missing words, it uses the same double square brackets. Okay, but missing words will by default ask you to select the right answer, and you have to group it so that then it falls into the same group. So let's say, for example, I want to add more answers into the choice number 1, which is group 1. I would put in, for example, okay. And I want to add more answers to group 2, which river has the most fish in it. So let's put this as, for example, group 2, Sungai Perak. Okay, but all these answers is going to be the wrong answers. If you want to change the right answer, you need to change it in the first choice that corresponds to the first number 1 square bracket. Then the number 2 square bracket is actually choice number 2. Okay, so let's save changes and look at preview. So now you see that I have, okay, so save this correctly. Let me check. Okay, save changes. Let's look at the question again. So now, yeah, so the additional answer has been programmed into the system. Okay, so those are some of the interesting question types that we have, and I would suggest you explore the different question types by looking and reading at your blog, our blog here. You can find it in edX website. Okay, question types in SPeCTRUM quiz online, and also to create the house or create the rules for the quiz, I would suggest that you read using SPeCTRUM quiz for summative assessment. So this is where we teach you with the help of a video, several videos, how to control the quiz behaviors and how it actually helps you with setting up your quiz. So I give you back to Dr. Amira to probably ask a few questions and close the section.
Great, thank you, Dr. Zahid. That was certainly quite a lot that you shared with us, and we do have a few more questions. So we have some questions that are mainly about question or exam design, but there is one question here that's technical. So somebody would like to ask, if the course has many groups, can I restrict the quiz to only a certain group?
Yes, of course, you can do that. You can do that by going to in the quiz section. Okay, so let's go back to the example. I'll share my screen again. So when you create questions, you can actually restrict the questions to certain groups. So how you do that is actually by going to the edit settings in the question itself, okay, and then in the restrict access, you can add the restriction. So and in here, you can actually select the group that you want to restrict the access to. So this is where, for example, you choose kumpulan satu. That means only kumpulan satu will be able to see will be able to attempt the course. And in the system, it will show actually restricted, not available unless you belong to kumpulan satu. So that is how you can actually select or restrict the access to certain groups.
A related question, Dr. Zahir, can we set a password for each different group to answer a quiz or a test?
Okay, so remember just now when we restrict the access, yeah, so when we create the settings, you can actually go when you can actually go to the extra restrictions, then you can actually require the password, and then you can actually put in actually text the password. So that is how you create the password for that. But I would say that when you have already restricted the groups, then students from other groups will be automatically unable to access the quiz anyway.
Okay, that's great to know. So we can just limit the quiz to our special group and not for all the students in the course. Okay, now we move on to some design questions. So there's a couple of questions here asking, how can you upload graphs or photos or images for students to look at and answer questions based on them?
All right, thank you. I actually have a sample of that in my question bank in one of my courses. So let me, I think it's this one. Yes. So let's go and look at question that I had. Hopefully this is the right one. Yeah, I think so. So if you look at this question, okay, so let's look at this question. So this is where I put in or added a rectangle inside the question. And you can do this by actually creating, the way I do it is actually I put it in columns. Okay, so let me show you that question is now. So the way that I programmed that question is by creating or adding columns inside the question. So I type the instruction and then I added a 2x2 column, okay, and I actually paste a picture by clicking on the insert and edit image, and I upload the image of a square inside my question. So this is the question with the picture of the square. The way I create the square is actually using PowerPoint. So I create the square in PowerPoint and then I save it as an image, and then I paste it here. Then what I do is I just put in the numbers in the column. So what the students will see is actually okay. So what the students will see is actually this one. Okay. I have also a similar. I think it's this one. So this is also a similar question. So again, I created a picture. So instead of a instead of a 2x2 column where the picture sits on the left hand side, now it sits on the right hand side. And again, I put in the picture as an image which I created in PowerPoint. So it's quite straightforward. So when you try and look at it from the question setting page, it looks like this. Yeah, back to you.
Okay, very interesting. I never knew you could do that. That's very creative. So, We have a couple more questions. Now it's pertaining to how students can answer complex mathematical questions and write down complex mathematical equations. So there are actually a few questions about that. And one of our participants is asking, is it better to use essay type to create this kind of question and then enable the students to upload the answers in Word format when they submit?
Okay, so I think that's a two-part question. So you may have to help me with the second part just now. So the first part is you are talking about mathematical equations. The feedback or the answer for that is actually when you create a graph type of question or an essay type question, you can actually have the students to input mathematical formats in using the text editor. Okay, so let me show you an example of that. Let me share the screen first. Okay, so let's go back to my question bank. Okay, and so let's just take one of these essay question. Okay, so these are the essay question, and so when you do that with the question type, so this is an essay type question. You create the questions, then what you do is in the response option format, then you can actually change this or select either plain text, that means no complex mathematical formats, but you can also have HTML editor. So HTML editor allows you to insert the formats, the different types of format. And what the students will be expected to see is that they will have access to this special characters that they can actually put in. So that is how mathematical formats can be put in. But it's quite tedious because you need to actually find the right mathematical expression here. So that is how you can actually do or get the students to answer this type of question. But unfortunately, when you have an essay type question, then it has to be manually marked. Okay, so that's the first one, the first part. The second part is asking about the many students, isn't it? What was the second question again?
The second part is asking, firstly, it was asking, is it better to use essay type question to create this kind of question? That's number one. I think you already answered that. And the second part is, can we enable students to upload their answers in Word format when they submit? And I think in addition to that, can I ask us also, can we also have students write down their answers in pen and paper, take a picture of that, and upload it and submit that? So can we submit picture format and Word files for their quiz questions?
Yes, I think the answer is actually yes. You can get the students to write down their equations or whatever, and then have them to actually insert an image. Okay, so you can either insert image from the URL, okay, or so click on insert, then it will ask you to insert a picture from there. So the students can actually insert image, take a picture of it, and then insert the image from either their phones or their computers. So they need to have a way of putting or inputting their image into their computers. So that is a drawback of this. And I would suggest that if you have a number of questions doing that, meaning that the students have to write down their answer somewhere and then have it to take a picture of that question and then upload it to you, then I would suggest that you take this into account. That means if you normally do this in a pen and paper format, that takes only 2 hours. So in an online format, taking into account that they have to write the question, write the answer, and then take a picture of it and then upload it for you, then you need to add probably 2 minutes extra per the same type of question. So instead of a 2-hour exam, so if you, for example, have 5 types of this question, then you add another 10 minutes of that. Yes, back to you. Sorry, your microphone is muted.
Okay, sorry about that. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So that concludes all the questions that we have for questions and answer from our viewers. Before I close off this session, are there any parting words that you would like to give to our viewers today?
Yes. If you want to learn how to create different question types in SPeCTRUM or in either other Moodle system, that is the keyword actually. You can actually search in YouTube. There are many educators who created instructions or guidance in YouTube about doing not just quizzes inside SPeCTRUM, but also other things, other modules inside SPeCTRUM. So, be it an assignment or turn it in, everything is quite well documented in YouTube that you can actually go, or you can actually find a little bit of guidance that we have in our blog. Okay, so I can share you the blog that we have. So not just on SPeCTRUM, which is a Moodle system, but different types of also pages and also posts about doing things in Moodle that you can actually find from our blog. So yeah, I think that's what we have. And remember, this session is actually recorded, so you can actually go back and have a look at it again. If you don't understand, then that will help you, hopefully help you in your teaching and also in doing your assessment.
Okay, that's really great. Thank you so much, Dr. Zahir, for all your sharing. Hopefully it's been useful for all of our viewers here. To everyone, just before we close off, I'd just like to announce that ADEC is pretty excited because we've just launched our new and revamped website. So please do check that out at adec.um.edu.my, and from there you can also get into our blog, which Dr. Zahir had shown just now at WordPress. So please be sure to do that. And tune in again with us on Thursday afternoon because we'll be having a webinar with Professor Dr. Karim Alias, who is an e-learning expert, and he will be talking about how to conduct e-learning for students with minimal internet access. And also on the 14th, I believe Dr. Zahir has another webinar on Microsoft 365 and using that for our teaching and learning. And we will give you more information about that through our WhatsApp and Telegram groups. So thank you so much for watching, and #UMTeachOnline. All the best. Bye.